Welcome to Season 3 of the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast, the bi-weekly show that brings you the best of powerlifting in Canada. Our three co-hosts include Ryan Stin, holder of the highest equipped total in Canada, as well as owner of Unparalleled Training Centre in Moose Jaw, and co-owner of Inner Strength Products, Steve Cassioli, IPF world record holder and medalist, third strongest Canadian classic powerlifter of all time, and owner of Cassioli Strength and Conditioning. Lastly, Avi Silverberg, world bench press medalist, national team coach, and co-owner of MyStrengthBook.com. Today's episode starts right now.
This season of the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast is brought to you by MyStrengthBook.com. MyStrengthBook is a web-based platform for powerlifters to build workouts, plan training programs, and assess training metrics that lead to better performance on the platform. Tracking and analyzing training metrics allow you to uncover key trends and insights on what works for you and the precise variables that lead to greater success. Say goodbye to pen and paper tracking and hard-to-use spreadsheets. Say hello to MyStrengthBook. Sign up now for a free trial at www.mystrengthbook.com.
Hello and welcome back to the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast. You're sitting down with Ryan, Steve, and myself, Avi, and we got a great episode here for you this week. We're going to roll into it because there's a lot of content. We sat down with Ryan Fowler, and Ryan is the CPU Coaching Committee Chairman, and he's been one of the longest-standing board members of the CPU and has a lot of great perspective on the sport. But we really get into the new CPU Coaching Certification Program. This has been a topic that has been on the mouths of a lot of people in terms of what the course is about, the value of the course, and we get right into the nitty-gritty to try to answer a lot of questions that we've been seeing on social media about this program. There's been people on sort of both sides of the fence. People thinking that this is a good thing for the CPU in powerlifting, and people thinking that this is just merely a cash grab and something that should be many years from now, that we're not just simply at the membership numbers to support something like this. So we are going to get into all that. We asked Ryan a lot of great questions, and he has all of the great answers. I want to start this podcast on a positive note, and Ryan let us know that the coaching committee, the CPU coaching committee, is going to give away one free coaching certification program. So that's of a value of $400. And we are going to turn it over to Ryan right now to talk about how you can actually enter into that so that you know that there is going to be a contest, there is going to be a giveaway right at the front end of the episode. So Ryan, how can people enter for that?
So as usual, you can head to our website, CanadianPowerliftingPodcast.com, click on the contest page, and enter your information there, first name, last name, and email address. We will draw a random winner from that pool of entries. Please only enter once, but otherwise, CanadianPowerliftingPodcast.com, contest, enter your information, and you'll be in.
And we're really excited about this podcast because we know it's timely. We know there's a lot of people asking questions about this course. We're going to roll into it in just a second, but I want to turn over to Steve to tell us a little bit about how he's training for Worlds, because as we record this, we're probably only about less than 2 weeks away from Steve stepping on the platform. And Steve, you're going in second this year. Tell us about how you're feeling, how training is going. Just give us a little bit of a life update.
Training's been going really well. I think I'm right where I want to be, need to be. I'd like to make a run for the podium this year. I know last year wasn't my greatest performance. A few things happened leading up into that meet, but this year's been really good. My past 3 meets, I've gone 9 for 9 and hoping to continue it and bring home a medal for Canada.
Absolutely. And you've been working with some new programming. How's that programming going? And tell us about some of the lifts you've been doing in training. Tell us some of the high moments of training.
Yeah, so lifting has definitely been a little different than I've normally programmed for myself. So I've been working with my boss, and I've been doing a lot more like accessory movements. So my primary movements right now are probably about half of what they normally would be, volume-wise, and the rest would be accessory work. I'm still hitting about that same total weekly number, but a lot more accessory work, working on imbalances, and seem to be pretty like injury free and seem ready to go for Worlds. So
I was just gonna say, if you can get to a meet and not feel injured and beat up, you're probably gonna PR and do pretty well. But as you get going on further along in your career, that's harder and harder and harder to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, everything's been going well. Some highlights. I mean, I've hit over 90% in all three, and I mean, they're all moving how they should be. So hopefully, I'm set up for some PRs and ready to go.
Now I'm going to turn it over back to Ryan, and I'm going to let Ryan introduce this podcast. Ryan, I'm letting you introduce this podcast because you're Ryan's brother-in-law. So why don't you take it away and get us started?
All right, well, then we will roll into our recording with Ryan Fowler. As Avi said, he's my brother-in-law and my wife's brother. So without further ado, here's our recording with Ryan Fowler.
This week on the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast, we're sitting down with Ryan Fowler. For those of you who don't know Ryan Fowler, he is Ryan Stinn's brother-in-law and Rhea Stinn's sister. And I'll also let him introduce himself, and he can tell you a little bit about. Brother. I messed that intro up. Rhea Stinn's brother, and I'll let him introduce himself and tell you about his background in powerlifting and sort of where he's at now and what he does for the sport on the executive level. So we're really happy to have Ryan join us. And why don't you introduce yourself, as I said, Ryan?
Sure. Thanks for having me, guys. Well, I've been in the sport for a long time. I was thinking about this today, and in November of 1996 was the first day that the first time I met Jeff Butt. And it's almost 21 years ago. Been competing in the sport since 2002, February of 2002, and been kind of at it ever since. Some years have been better than others in terms of ability and time, but have always been into the sport. I've been in the sport since then. I've been on the Saskatchewan Powerlifting Executive since I believe it was 06. Is that right, Stin?
2005.
2005. So you know it's better than I do. Oh yes, where I became the president, and I've stayed as the president since that time. Seen a lot of change in the sport since 2005. I've sat on the CPU executive in terms of as the provincial president. I've also held the role of coaching chair for the last, I guess it'd be 3 years. And
that's sort of a good segue into what we want to talk about. We want to talk about coaching today on the podcast. But yeah, you've been one of the longest standing executive board members at the CPU level. People sort of come and go over the years, but you've sort of had that chair at the executive level for a number of years. And as you said, have seen a lot of change and progress. And so that's why we want to sort of bring you on the podcast and talk a little bit about the new coaching program that is that's being already developed and sort of being rolled out now in each province. Before we actually get into that, though, why don't you just tell us what you do in the coaching committee? Because I think that a lot of people might not understand that the CPU is, the executive board, and then there's committees that run underneath of it that sort of help with some of the day-to-day stuff, or some, not necessarily the day-to-day stuff, but more so like project-based stuff. So coaching committee, sort of, who's, what's the role of the coaching committee, and what do you actually do?
Well, back in, I want to say 2008, maybe 2009, maybe a little bit earlier, I started investigating what we needed as a sport to get involved with NCCP and Sport Canada. And since that time, we've seen a lot of changes in the area of coaching. And really, when I looked into it back at that time, we had two major pieces that the CPU was missing. One was memberships, and the second one was our coaching certification program. In order to even enter conversations with Sport Canada and with NCCP, we needed to have a coaching certification program. And so kind of we've been bouncing around the idea for years now. It eventually came to the point where, as the sport started to grow, we saw a need for a coaching certificate or a coaching committee. That coaching committee has done a lot of work around naming international team coaches, starting to develop that pool of our coaches. We've been through a few iterations of how we do that, but the committee has done lots of that work over the last, I'd say five or so years of naming international team coaches. It's definitely a refined process now. We're trying to continue to grow our pool of coaches, but that is always a challenge, to find people who are able and willing to give up the time, usually from their day job, to go and coach for a world class or world championship team or an international team, whether it's North Americans or the North American bench. So the coaching committee has been heavily involved in that. The coaching committee has also been in the last year and a half heavily involved in the development and rollout of the coaching certification program. And there's been a lot of work done by a lot of people behind the scenes in terms of vetting what the coaching program is going to look like, in terms of looking through the manuals, in terms of giving feedback, in terms of just trying to get that set up so it's the best product we can have for the membership of the CPU.
So I think Ryan Stin is also on the coaching committee too, and maybe we'll just get Ryan before we start talking about the coaching program. Maybe we'll just talk from Ryan's perspective, the other Ryan. Sort of some of his perspectives on the role of the coaching committee and sort of some of the work that's being done.
Yeah, I think I've been on the coaching committee now for I'm not sure 3 or 4 years, Ryan. I can't remember when I joined it. And initially, it kind of started out as kind of like a selection committee too. Like we did world team selections for athletes, which is kind of an odd choice since there actually had been a selection committee at one point. To build out the world team or coaches pool has been good. That's kind of one thing I wanted to talk about today was kind of how people, if they're interested in kind of getting to that level of coaching CPU national teams, like how would they kind of get there and what kind of qualities we kind of look for when we're doing our selection of those coaches. So that's kind of one thing I want to talk about a little bit today as well. So I don't know if you want to talk about that, Ryan, from your perspective, kind of what we look for when people apply to be a team coach and how they can kind of start down that path if that's something they want to try and get doing.
Sure. It used to be that whoever was going to coach was usually just going with some of their athletes, and they were willing to step up and say, yeah, I'll be there for the whole championship. I'm definitely willing to help out. Got some experience with coaching at that level. And, so we said, hey, great, that's awesome. You're in. We're to the point now where we do have a pool of coaches, and we definitely have a process, and we try to follow that process for name error coaches. In the last couple of years, we actually implemented an intern coach who attends the World Championships, if we can name one. If they go, they are under the direction of the head coach and the assistant coach, but they are there to learn, whether it's learning in the back room, learning the pace of a World Championship, because it's not like a local meet. It's not even like nationals, where you're trying to get onto a warm-up platform with people who don't speak another language. They might be crowded, they might be busy. You might have 3 or 4 lifters in the same flight that you're having to get ready for lifting. And so we've got an internship coach process that we've had a couple of coaches work their way through and go and intern and learn. And then the ideal would be they move up to an assistant coach of a world championship team before we name them to be a head coach, and then they would be named as a head coach to, let's say, the North American team first, and then for the North American Championships, and then on to the World Championships. That doesn't always work. I wouldn't say we have a big pool of coaches that are able and willing to do it, but we do have a pool of coaches. We're always looking to grow that and get people involved. We've got a couple new intern coaches going to the World Championships in Belarus here in the next couple of weeks. So that'll be good to get them into the fold of coaches that are have that experience coaching at that high level, the international meets.
So Ryan, a lot of people, and I've been involved with coaching at World Championships for a number of years now, and one of the things that I hear quite commonly is that it's sort of an easy job, that you can go to these championships, and why are we even sending coaches? Why aren't just athletes sort of helping each other? Like, what would you sort of say to those sorts of people who sort of just sort of challenge that process a little bit?
Right. Well, that used to be how it was done. I mean, I can remember going to World Championships and you were just coached by whoever came with you, the same person you trained with in the gym, typically. Back in the days of when he's trained with 2 or 3 people, and that was your team, and that's who always he trained with. Now we're to the point where that's not always the case. We are becoming a sport that is recognized at the national level in terms of the quality of our lifters. We're becoming a sport that's recognized at the international level, or a country that's recognized in terms of having lifters that are challenging now for podium finishes at almost every world championship. And that didn't used to be the case. And so as we look at that, and as we try to grow our sport and be recognized as a quote unquote legitimate sport, it's important that we now start to have a coaching course, or certified coaches that have some of that knowledge, have some background, kind of understand the philosophy of what Canadian powerlifting is, and always have that global perspective on, we're trying to do the best we can for our team, not necessarily just an individual. Well, in order to have a team success, you have to have individual success, but naming those coaches is important in that process of setting our team up for success. And I mean, in the last few years, we've won more team awards, or been in the top 3 of the team awards, than we've ever been, in as long as I can remember in the CPU. It was a miracle, if the Canadian team was top 5, and now we're consistently challenging for top 3, top 2, and sometimes winning that team award.
And I guess similar to that point, a lot of times I hear, when we go to these world championships, this is something that I have a very strong opinion on, but I'll let you respond and give us your thoughts. A lot of times you still have friends of athletes, or even, the personal coach of the athlete traveling to the world championship, and are sort of let down that, they have to work with the team coach who is assigned by the CPU, and that, their friend who, trains with them on an everyday basis, and knows how they lift, don't get to be with them backstage in terms of handling them and selecting attempts. What's sort of your thought process on that, and your, the sort of the philosophy of the CPU?
I think the thought of that is, again, going back to looking at the team and looking at the big picture, and not necessarily focusing on one individual. Not that you wouldn't, trust that the person back there is going to help out the whole team. But when you're named by the national body as the national team head coach, you're able to develop some unity. You're able to do some pre-work with the athletes. I know, Abby, for example, you, Ryan, when you guys have been named head coaches, you set up, weekly check-ins with all of the team that's going. You set up the ability to conference with them, to see training videos, to check in how they're doing, to talk about what they need in terms of game day. It's tough when the IPF limits the number of coaches that are in the back room. We have to draw a line, and we have to say, well, here's how we can handle that then, right? And there's times where, a lifter's personal coach might fit into those numbers, and there's other times where the numbers preclude any personal coach or coaches from being in the back room. And so CPU has taken the stance that we are going to name our team and go from there. There is the odd example where a personal coach has been allowed, depending on circumstance, and also depending on classic versus equipped, because equipped lifting and being in the warm-up room is totally different than being in the warm-up room, just with the need for the gear and people to wrap and pull straps, and there's more to the coaching in the warm-up room with equipped lifting than there is with classic lifting.
I think one good distinction that I know Abby and I have talked about in the past, and we might have talked about in the podcast, is that a lot of times personal coaches are too invested in the athlete and their numbers, right? Too often I hear personal coaches say, oh, they're good for this, right? They're good for whatever because I know them. And when in reality, if you actually step back and watch the lifting, from an outside perspective, they're not good for that, right? Like, just because you want something doesn't make it true. And having someone who's impartial can a lot of times lead to a better day than say having someone who's just a cheerleader.
Yeah, and I also think that there's sort of a naivety around how complex it can get at the international level when you have literally 8 people who could podium, where you're never going to get that sort of scenario at a local event, a national event. You might be in battles, but you're not going to be in battles with 8 people who can make the podium. And I think that requires a level of expertise that is requires the process that Ryan laid out, which is that, you know, you should be progressing through the levels and getting that experience so that when you are coaching a guy like Steve, who is going for the podium, and there's 8 people who could be on the podium right there with you, you know, you have this sort of skill to handle the math, the quick math on the spot, but also to be able to judge your competitors and to judge your own athlete. And that sort of goes back to the reason why I believe that it's similar coaches each year going to the World Championships, is because we've been working with those athletes. Like, you know, this is sort of the 4th time I've worked with Kelly going to Belarus, and now this is the 3rd time I've worked with Steve. Like, these are sort of guys that we know how they perform and we sort of know the competition. Ryan, why don't we jump into the coaching program now? This is something that even just today in my emails, I'm receiving a million emails regarding the coaching program, with, you know, because of the multiple hats that I wear, and not only from, you know, being the Alberta president, but also being a course facilitator and then being involved in the conversation at the CPU level. It's just right now, it's a very hot time to be talking about this coaching certification, because I don't believe that there's been good communication around it. I think that the CPU has failed to communicate properly what this course is about, and sort of the whole mandatory component, whether that is something that's going to happen, something that's not. I don't think the benefits have been communicated effectively. And there just seems to be a lot of, from my perspective, talking to people, seeing what's happening online, there seems to be a lot of pushback. So why don't we just start by describing what the actual course is and sort of the goals of it?
So the course is a basically called the CPU coaching certification. The whole intent of it is that it's written in terms of being like an NCCP course. So like weightlifting, like well, hockey's a bad example because they do their own coaching courses.
And Ryan, I'll just stop you right there for a second.
Yeah.
You mentioned this earlier in the podcast. You mentioned NCCP. Maybe not a lot of people who come from sporting backgrounds even know what that is. So why is that something that's like something that we're trying to parallel? Like, what is the importance of that?
Well, the NCCP is the national governing body for all sports and their coaching programs. So the National Coaching Certification Program. It's changed how it looks over the last 5 to 7 years. Used to be you had your level 1, level 2, all the way up to your level 5, with your level 1 being your local coaches, all the way up to your level 4s and 5s being your coaches that coach at the Olympics or at the World Championships. And in all of those sports, those were the people who had that certification who were coaching. Even now, if you look at all of the sports, you don't get to coach the national team without being a certified level 3 coach. That's just the bare requirements. And if you want to move above that, well, you keep taking your coaching education. And really, that's I think the best way to look at this is it's education. It's coach education. It's aimed and developed for powerlifters and for powerlifting coaches, but it's not solely focused at them. Our hope is that this coaching certification program, the level 1 anyway, is taken by personal trainers, by CrossFit coaches, by maybe some high school coaches, some football coaches who want to get a better understanding of powerlifting and the lifts that powerlifting entails, which we all know translate into strength in all other areas of sport. And so while this is focused and has been written by the CPU for the CPU, that's our goal, is to broaden the horizons and hopefully influence those people who are out there strength training and coaching, who have no knowledge and background of powerlifting. I mean, we've all been there where you've been in a commercial gym and you saw somebody coaching somebody else and how to squat, and you just have to turn away because you're thinking then that person's going to get hurt, or that's the worst thing you could ever tell somebody in terms of technical cue. We've seen it. Yeah. And our hope is that we can help to influence the sport or the fitness world in terms of coaching the big 3 lifts.
So talk about the structure of the course now, in terms of, what do you've signed up for it, what are you sort of actually getting from the course? It is a 2-day course. So what are sort of coaches and participants going to learn in the course? And then you also mentioned that, this level 1, you mentioned that, like, is there a level 2, like sort of what is the structure? What do you get out of the weekend course? Then what's sort of the structure of it?
Sure. It starts with the level 1. Level 1 again is aimed at all of your local coaches, your maybe a provincial coach, but also aimed at the personal trainers, the CrossFit coaches, the strength coaches that are out there in the world that are teaching people how to lift. So from that, it's a 2-day course. You then receive the instruction for the 2 days. You receive the manual, a workbook, a very well written manual, and I've taken a lot of NCCP courses in other sports through my education and through my schooling, and the manual that we have would rival any of them in terms of a reference piece of material. It was vetted by some of the best lifters and some of the best coaches in the country, and feedback was provided, and I think the end product is actually quite a good product. In terms of, you can put it on your shelf and you can use it as a reference or a resource for teaching people how to powerlift, how to do the big 3. So the level 1 gives you those. It gives you the instruction over the 2 days. You will go through some classroom components. You will go through some actual training components where you're training. You're giving feedback to each other as a coach would. Maybe it depends on how the facilitator chooses to run it, but they might set up where you're going to give, you assign one of the coaches taking the course to do something that's wrong, and everybody else has to try and fix it or give different cues to fix it, or assess what might be beneficial for that athlete if that happened to be their athlete. It kind of puts you in some real life situations that you might experience in the gym. Training somebody. It's also focused. There is a component around what does a meet day look like, some of the basics. It's a great example. There was a meet here on last weekend in Toronto, and there was a question asked, can we take a 4th attempt? I mean, this is 2017, and we say there's no need for coach education, but we still have people asking about 4th attempts, and that's fine, but that tells you that there's a need for education to educate our coaches, because the pro show is not necessarily a amateur, first lifter, first time show or a competition. And so the level 1 is again aimed at giving some of that basic entry level education. From there, you can become either certified or trained. One is aimed at the CrossFit coaches or the strength coaches who are never going to be coaching in the CPU, but they want to get that designation behind their name that they are CPU level 1 trained coaches. The certified is level 1 certified. And the biggest difference between those two is the trained coaches are required to do 25 hours. They're required to log 25 hours of their coaching time. The certified coaches have to log 50 hours. And the certified coaches then, long term, those are the ones who are going to be able to be in the back room, in the warm-up rooms at nationals or at regionals. We may get to the point where that's the case at provincials. That'll be up to each province to decide, but I could foresee that coming into effect in some provinces. Level 2, then, which is still in development and we haven't got it started yet, is going to be aimed at our international teams. Again, continuing to provide coach education for our international coaches and developing that pool and providing the opportunities for them to enhance their education and skill.
So let's just dive into this a little bit further, because you just provided a lot of information. You do the weekend course, and then just so that everybody's clear, you sort of, after the weekend course, you sort of have that baseline. You can then go off and choose to do either one of two sort of paths. You can, after the course, you either go and you log 25 hours, or you go and log 50 hours, and sort of it brings you to this next level. How are you actually supposed to log those hours? Who sort of vets those hours? Can it be, there's lots of online coaches who, watch videos of athletes. They're not working with them in person. You might have a phys ed teacher who is working with high school athletes in a gym, but they're training for football, but they're doing the powerlifting movements. You might have, a personal trainer working with powerlifters. Like, so how are you actually accumulating those hours? Is it sort of all encompassing? And how do you actually get that vetted?
Well, the start there'd actually be 3 streams, because you could choose not to log any hours. You could take the course and that's it. It's just education for yourself, trying to better yourself as a strength coach, or in the knowledge that you need for the 3 lifts. And that might be all you do. If you choose to want to be able to put a certificate on your wall, I guess, for lack of a better terminology, you can do the 25 hours of logging. When you do those are sent, you log them. There's a log sheet that's included in the coaching course, and you would log your hours. You'd write down what you did, and then you would send those into Peak Power. Peak Power is who has written this course for us. They started it, wrote it, sent it out to the CPU, and I then contacted a number of people to look through that course and provide feedback. But that piece of it is handled by Peak Power. If you choose to go and become certified, logging the 50 hours of coaching, then you would send those into one of the course facilitators. And it doesn't have to be the same one that gave the course in the first time. Like if Abby, you conducted a course and Steve took it from you, and then Steve's back home and he can't, you're not out in BC, so he contacts whoever's in BC and they come he'll send his login to them. Following that, there is a component, if to finish the certification off, that you have to be viewed at a competition in your coaching role. And that would be done again by one of the facilitators. And they would come, they would watch you kind of from start to finish and give you an evaluation. This isn't meant to be onerous, but it is meant to ensure that our coaches are doing what they need to be doing. Again, they shouldn't be asking if there should be a 4th attempt in the deadlifts. That shouldn't be happening. We should have that education out there by now.
So Ryan, I have a question. So on the Canadian Powerlifting Union site, kind of lays out saying within like the next few years, in order to get like access to the warm-up room, you're going to have to like have the certification in order to coach at nationals, right?
Yeah, and there's been no date set on that. There's been lots of dates thrown around, but there has been nothing officially said. I know that the original talk was in a 1 to 2 year time frame, and then there was people who said, well, no, that's way too fast. It needs to be 4 to 5 year time frame. So there has been no time frame set, but the intent is that in order to gain access to the back room as a coach, you will need to be certified as a level 1 coach. And there's a couple of reasons for that, and I'll try and stay off my soapbox, but I'm kind of passionate about this in coaching in general, in any sport. And we've all been there where you have one lifter who's lifting and they've got an entourage around them. And the entourage consists of somebody who's maybe handling their numbers, and maybe a girlfriend and her best friend and the guy's 2 other training partners. And all of a sudden there's 6 or 7 people in the warm-up room, and they're all standing at the chalk bowl, talking about how that person just did on the platform. I mean, we don't need that, right? If you want to be, like Abby had said earlier, if you want to be a cheerleader and go sit in the crowd and cheer and give that feedback. That way, let the coaches handle the athletes in the warm-up room. So we're trying to get away from having that big group of people hanging out in the warm-up room. And we're also trying to, I guess, make our sport look professional. And your coaches are the ones who are in the warm-up room. I mean, I've coached now. This will be my 2nd World Games that I've been on the coaching staff for the Canadian team. It is our biggest event in our sport, is the World Games. And in Colombia, there was only one coach allowed out from in behind in the lifter prep area. Like, I wasn't even allowed to go out and watch. I had to stay back there, and I had to catch it off of the video feed, because I could kind of get an angle on the video screen. And that was just the reality of being at the World Games, is they allowed one coach out to watch the lift. Again, we want to look like a professional organization, a professional sport, a high level sport, and we're all passionate about this sport, then we need to portray that. And having an entourage come out and in high heels and a dress. I've seen that. I've seen people walk around the warm rooms in high heels dress. You're not coaching. The IPF has very clear specifications on what coaching attire looks like.
Does that just come down to like just security at meets though? Or because I mean, a lot of questions are going to be like raised about this because, for example, if let's say 20, 30, 40 people get certified and we're going to have like hundreds of people at nationals. So if you don't have this certification and there's going to be tons of athletes left out without coaches, they just handle themselves.
Well, our hope would be that everybody who's doing coaching goes and gets the certification. There will be a challenge process to challenge the course. That's just been developed or being worked on. And in fact, I think Mark has I don't know if he has released a statement or not on the Facebook, CPU Facebook, but he will be, and I'm sure it will be out by the time this episode airs, talking about that there's a challenge process, and it sounds like they're going to be open that up to lots. The requirement to challenge it is going to be fairly minimal. So that's going to be out there for people to take advantage of. But our hope is that there isn't just 20 or 30. I mean, I would like to see that if you're coaching 5 lifters and you're going to nationals, well, go do the course and get it done. And you know, then it's not an issue. You can be in the back room and you can be in the warm-up room. Part of it is security. And I mean, I would say in the last few years when we ran the nationals last year, our security in the back room was the most it's ever been. I mean, you had to have your wristband, and there was athletes. Stan and I've talked about this, that Kelly Branton was told, no, you can't come in the back room. You don't have a wristband on, right? And why? Not because we don't want Kelly back there, but because it was a smaller area for warm-ups, but we wanted people back there who were actually doing the coaching of the athletes, not there to just say, hey, good squat. You know, you want to do that? Go out and into the crowd. I mean, we have that ability as athletes that we do our 3 attempts, and then usually there's a break, whether you're warming up or it's an actual break where you might be able to sneak out and talk to somebody for a minute or two, and go and get some feedback from your day-to-day coach, or you know, get congratulations from your buddies or whatever you need to do. But coaching is coaching, and that's the direction we're moving with this.
So I'm just I play contrarian because I know that a lot of people will listen to this and want to ask these questions. You know, why so much onerous sort of procedure around the coaching certification in terms of getting certified? You know, like you got to take a 2-day course. You then have to do some homework and log the hours and submit those. Then you got to coach at a meet under a facilitator. Who sort of is evaluating your performance on game day, and why such an onerous course all of a sudden out of nowhere? How come? I mean, not out of nowhere. That's been in the works for a long time, but why not start at a base level, a basic level, and then sort of scaffold on top of that? Why are we launching something now that is going to be a full-fledged NCCP type of a course? I
think if we want to invest in this and we want to get it in place, we need to just do it, right? I mean, we could say, okay, well, you have to take the course and you don't have to log your hours now. And in a year's time, you're going to have to then log your hours. And then in another year's time, you're going to have to be evaluated at a meet. Or we just say, let's just do it. Let's take the hit right now and take our lumps right now, but this is what is best for, or what is viewed to be best for coaches and for the CPU. I'm excited about the course. I think there's lots of good things about it. I think there's lots of areas that it's going to continue to mold and shape and tweak and change. And but I think the feeling was that, rolling this out and just getting it going in the form that we're hoping that it's going to take was important.
One thing I want to say is that, like you said, there's going to be growing pains with it. There just will, and things will tweak and change over the time. And my best example of something like this that happened in the past was when the CPU adopted CSIS. And so for lots of people who are in the sport now, you wouldn't know this, but when I started, we had to do a drug test for anytime you set a national record, you got drug tested. That drug test was administered by a referee, or if that referee was not of the same sex as you, just someone there that could watch you pee. So if you think about how that kind of looks, if you take a step back and go, well, that seems kind of conflict of interesty. It's true. So in 2008, I think, or 2009, after a lot of discussion and argument at the national level, it was decided to adopt CCS testing. There was a lot of growing pains with it. Number of tests went down because the cost went up so much. But I think looking back now, almost 10 years later, we can see that the success that CCS is having in testing people and catching the people who are cheating is a good thing for our sport. So I think, right now this coaching thing seems like you're hard done by because you have to do this now. I think in 10 years we'll look back and say, it took some growing, it took some time to get everything smoothed out, but it was the best thing we could do for the sport. And I think it's, if we're looking at trying to become a national sport organization, which I think ideally would be, a goal, we can't get there without doing without getting into NCCP. And we can't get into NCCP until we have a coaching program, which is kind of a weird thing since NCCP helps you write a coaching program, but they won't help you unless you have one. So there's going to be some growing pains, but I think it's in the long run, it's going to be a good thing.
So let's talk about sorry, go ahead, Ryan.
I was just going to say the other thing about, I've heard lots of comments about is the price and the cost of it. And I don't know how do you value coach education? I guess that's the question that you have to be left asking is what value do you place on being educated as a coach? Yes, when I started this sport, it was because I wanted to start lifting, and I did my first meet and have kind of been involved in the sport for seriously for 15 years now. Done 16 national championships and been coached by lots of people over the years. And at the end of the day, though, this is still a hobby for me, as it is for most people. There's nobody making a living being a lifter. And the argument is, well, it is a hobby. And yeah, it's a hobby, but we've all spent thousands and thousands of dollars on this hobby. There are people out there who are making a living as full-time coaches. And not that justifies the cost, but that's a reality in the sport today. 5 years ago, that wasn't the reality. I would have laughed if 5 years ago somebody had told me, oh yeah, there's going to be lots of people out there making a living as a powerlifting coach, right? And maybe that's not solely they might coach strength athletes or they might coach athletes, but as a powerlifting coach making a living, that was unheard of. And lots of those people doing that have lots of knowledge, but maybe don't have the same history that some of us do in terms of numbers of meets and seeing different situations and being able to coach through those situations. So the hope is that this can provide those people who are making that living the best opportunity to be successful, because at the end of the day we want everybody to be successful. And so what is it an arbitrary cost? Well, no, it's a cost set by the CPU, and it just is what it is. Our hope is that we can continue to move forward with it. Is there a potential to get it included as continuing education credits for those who can use it as that? Yeah, we'll be investing in that. Mark Morris of Saskatchewan sits on one of the boards for one of the continuing education, and he started some conversations at that level to, of course, meet some of the requirements for people who do this, who coach for a living, or can they use it for continuing education credit, right? And that's, I guess there's really no way to justify the cost of something. That's like trying to justify the cost of buying a house in Toronto versus a house in Weyburn, right? You can't justify it. It just is what it is. And so
for a lot of people, for myself and everybody here on the podcast, we're well educated, being involved in powerlifting a long time. And we place a value on making sure that the standards are extremely high, and that people are held to those standards, and that there's a common knowledge when you walk into a national or international warm room. But for some people, it just comes down to dollars and cents. They are going to view this course. They're going to look at the price, and they're just wanting to go to nationals to help their one buddy. It's not just going to be somebody who's making a career out of it. For myself, of course, coaching tons of powerlifters, gotta have it. For somebody who's just going to coach their buddy, it just seems it's going to come down for those people to dollars and cents. And I've already seen some comments online of people saying exactly that. So that's why I'm bringing this up. For someone to spend $400 and then another $160 for the meet day facilitation part of the course, how do you sort of validate those numbers? Where is that money? Where is that money for just the one person who needs to get it to go to nationals eventually one day? Like how would you sort of explain that to that person?
Well, I would hope we're not weeding them out. That's not the intent of the program. The intent is to have a course out there that is available to those who are interested in coaching. And helping your buddy, that's great. Then go take the course, right? And you might not be able to this year. Maybe it's got to be next year. Maybe it's got to be the year after. But we know the cost, and so it's a matter of budgeting for it potentially and making it work. Or maybe if you're going to go and help out 2 or 3 of your buddies, maybe your buddies need to pay for you to do that, to take the course, so that you can be in the back room and help them out. Again, it's not about limiting people or making this difficult for them. It's about trying to set the standard, like you said, and upholding that standard of what is powerlifting in our country, and what it means to be a coach, and ensuring that our athletes are supported as best as they possibly can. And that's by providing the opportunity for people to be coached. I guess I look at it in terms of other sports, and most other sports, you don't just get to go to nationals because I train with you. You have to be one of their certified coaches. You have to be in their coaching pool in order to coach that team. Club volleyball, for example, in my area is huge. And there are coaches here who coached for years and are no longer able to coach because club volleyball is saying, no, you have to have a level 1 certification to be a club volleyball coach, just your basic club volleyball coach. And so, there's people that are unhappy, but they're just saying, look, we have a standard we want to uphold when it comes to our athletes, and providing the opportunities for our athletes to be successful, because that's at the end of the day what this is about. This isn't about coaches. This is about athletes, and about providing athletes the opportunity and the ability to be successful on the platform. And so, that's the one example that I know right now is happening in the volleyball world in Saskatchewan, and it's happening in other sports. So I know that, and you don't walk into the weight or the warm up room of a weightlifting meet at the National Weightlifting Championships just because I train with you. Well, no, you're coached by the national team coach or the provincial team coach. That's just how it is. We had a gal that came to nationals this year. So she came to our training camp, and that was one of the questions she asked, because she's also done some weightlifting, and she said, is there a provincial team coach? So we explained how the process was working and how that may be a reality in 5 or 7 or 10 years, but right now, no. She's like, oh, okay, because she'd done a weightlifting meet and went to nationals and was coached by the national or the provincial coach. That's just how it was. So if she wanted to do that, that's just what she had to do. And I think that the benefit is the education piece and the continuing to grow yourself as an adult, as somebody who's helping others.
I think a lot of people will learn a lot from the course, having looked through the manual and having sort of helped edit the manual, and I know Ryan as well. There's some really good, solid information out there that I know people will probably get a benefit from. I just don't think it's being marketed in the best way by the CPU. I don't think even at the time of rollout should there have been any mention of it being mandatory, because nobody's decided anything yet. It's not at this time mandatory. I think we should be looking at it from that education piece. One of the other things that perhaps you could clarify is the actual breakdown of the fees, because a lot of the course instructors have been getting a little bit of flack in terms of looking at the price of the course being $400 and then thinking that the course instructors are just raking it in, so to speak. And so how is that? How are the fees broken down, and perhaps break out those misconceptions?
Sure. So the fees are $50 goes to Peak Power, and again, Peak Power is the company that wrote it, with Mike Suster as the lead of that, that compiled it, that put the whole thing together, that has done all of the work on the back end of it to make what's going to be presented, and up until this date, he's done that for free, and so that he's being recouped by the $50 going to him and his company. I don't have the numbers in front of me, but I think it's 135, give or take, goes to the CPU to continue with coaching education. And as the chair of the coaching committee, I mean, I'd love to get to the point where we can subsidize some of the coaching course, right? Or we can say, you know what, we're apply and we've got 5 grants for the coaching course this year. Put your applications in. We're not at that point right now. We don't have the budget for it. But as people take this course and contribute into the coaching pool, that's going to happen. I'm hoping that happens. But some of that money needs to go towards translating the documents into French, which is not cheap. We live in a bilingual country. They have to be translated in order to run courses in Quebec or in other areas of Canada, in New Brunswick potentially, where there's a need for the French language manual or the French language workbooks. So that's not cheap. That's still to be done yet, but that will need to be paid for. And then the remainder goes to the facilitator. Now the facilitator is on the hook. They have to pay for everything. So if they have to rent a venue, they're paying for it. If they have to bring in a set of weights so that they can do the classroom or the training component of it and pay for the mileage, the travel of those weights, that's their cost. All the costs of running the course are borne by the facilitators. And that includes printing all of the manuals. So they're going to go, and the document is probably about 90 pages, plus there's a workbook. So you're looking at a significant amount of money printing, and there is a standard that has been set as to what the manuals will look like. So they all look the same across the country, and each facilitator is responsible for getting them printed in their location. So all of the costs of running the course are borne by the facilitator. And so, running a course, they might make $200 off of each of them, but there's definitely going to be costs associated to them as the facilitator for running it.
So once you have this certification, is it going to be like a renewal process?
Right now, there's not. Right now, once you have it, you have it. And if you look across the sports and across their levels, some of them have a requirement to be reevaluated, some don't. And right now we've said, no, this is a one-time thing, get it done, check it off. And is it a box check? I guess it depends on how you look at it. It might be for some. For others, I think they're going to really appreciate the value of what they're learning in this course. So we're running a new lifter workshop in Saskatchewan next week. And, for those that come, I mean, any of the feedbacks we've received from them, they love it because it's just feedback. It's just an opportunity to learn. That's the hope with this. And our hope is that we also get, again, like I said at the beginning, we get lots of those CrossFit coaches, those strength coaches, the football coaches, the phys ed teachers, et cetera, and they start to become more knowledgeable in powerlifting. I mean, I've done a course at a CrossFit in town. I know Stin coaches at one of the CrossFits in Moose Jaw. I don't know if either of you guys are doing any of the coaching, but when you walk into a CrossFit gym, those are people passionate about training, but they may not have the same knowledge we do around the big three. And I would foresee lots of CrossFit coaches potentially taking this just to get the knowledge, and will provide that for them. So I think there's more benefits to this course than there is negatives. And like anything, there's always going to be road bumps and speed bumps. The intent is not to turn anybody away from the CPU, which the CPU is the Cadillac of powerlifting federations, and we want to continue pushing that forward. And I think we've got another piece here that's out there now for not just for our lifters, but for our coaches, because we didn't have anything before. There's individuals who have run courses like Abby. I know you've ran some coach or some seminars. And Steve, I assume you've probably done some, and I know there's other people. Chris Fudge has his own, seminars that he does, and those are all great. And great information is provided with them. This course is intended to streamline it all and put everybody on the same page at the national level, so that a coach that takes the course from Avi in Alberta gets the same information as they do taking the course from Art Chan in Ontario, right? And it's just going to be done in a different way, taught or spoke to in a different way, but it's the same material. So just trying to set that up.
Ryan, I think this has been a lot of great information. I think it's pretty valuable, and I know that there'll be both feedback, positive and negative feedback on both sides, likely. But if somebody wants to get in contact with you, ask any follow-up questions, you're probably the guy to ask. Where can people get in contact with you? How do people reach out? Because you're not on Facebook,
sure,
Ryan. You're not on Facebook.
I'm not on Facebook. That's right. My day-to-day job, I just don't like kids seeing what I'm doing. But the best way to contact me is through email, saskpowerlifting@gmail.com. That's probably the best. I will do my best to answer questions. I'm aware that lots of people out there are in disagreement with this, or maybe don't see the same value. But I hope that people are coming to this with an open mind, saying, you know what, this is what's best for powerlifting in the country. To continue to grow our sport. I mean, we're looking at 3,000 members right now, and can we double that in the next 2 years? I don't know, maybe. But there's going to be a lot of people out there who need a lot of knowledge and education given to them. So I hope we can be open-minded and can do that. And if people still disagree with it, that's their right. And I guess they can hopefully see the benefits of it as we continue to roll this out. I was going to say that I think the coaching committees, we've got a little bit of cash. We'd be willing to give away one clinic if you want to do a draw or whatever you usually do. Yeah, on the podcast.
Oh man, that'd be awesome. Yeah, that would be great. Cool. We can figure out how to get that done and everything. We'll figure it out here between us. Sure. But yeah, that'd be awesome. That'd be great.
If you want, it doesn't matter to me, but I think that might lend itself nicely to this podcast.
Stan, did you have a question or something?
Yeah, just before we let you go, if you're watching this and not listening to it, even if you're listening to it, here's the deal. Lots of people get me and Ryan Fowler confused. The important distinction is if there's hair above the face, it's Ryan Fowler. If there's hair below the face, it's Ryan Stin. So Ryan Fowler doesn't have a beard. I have a beard. That's the difference.
That's right. It's really awkward when people think I'm Stin, because that means I'm married to my sister. And while we're from Saskatchewan, we're not that hillbilly.
And the problem is he's not on Facebook, so I end up getting Facebook messages all the time for him, and I have to explain that I'm not the same person. So beard is not Fowler.
Good to clarify, and I think we'll leave it at that. Thanks, Ryan Fowler, for coming on the podcast, and we'll talk to you soon.
You bet. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Ryan. All right, we'd like to thank Ryan Fowler for coming on the podcast. We touched upon a lot of stuff today. The main content being around the CPU coaching certification, like what it is, who's it for, the delivery, and then he, like Ryan mentioned in the beginning, he's giving away one free registration to the winner.
I guess that's
it.
Basically it. And by the time we do return back on the podcast, it'll be after Worlds. Steve's heading to Worlds. I'm heading to Worlds to coach. Ryan's sitting this one out because he's going to the World Games in just over a month. So to lift. And so it's going to be exciting when we get back on the mic. We're going to have lots to talk about from Worlds, Belarus. Looking forward to it. And then we'll join Ryan on the prep to the World Games. So we'll catch everybody next time. And
good luck, guys.
Peace out.
You've been listening to the Canadian Powerlifting Podcast, the podcast that brings you the best of powerlifting in Canada, hosted by Stephen Cassioli, Ryan Stin, and myself, Avi Silverberg. Please follow us on Instagram and check out our website for some great free powerlifting content at www.canadianpowerliftingpodcast.com. If you like what you heard today, please rate our podcast on iTunes, and don't forget to listen to every other Thursday for a brand new episode.